waiting behind him. 10. Farmers in Africa plant hot chili peppers around their crops to keep elephants away. Jack ran straight out of town. Not only had he stolen something, more than one thing if you counted the cans and bottles he'd taken from the B&B, but people knew he had stolen something, and they knew his name. He was only a sighting away from being caught. He ran away from the crowded sidewalks, past the gazebo on the village green, down sidewalkless, winding island streets for about 20 minutes, until he came to a dirt road. Would they search for him down there? Not likely. After gulping down the entire contents of his water bottle, he followed the rutty road to a single farmhouse surrounded by fields. There didn't seem to be much activity at the house. No cars in the driveway, no tractor in the distance. An old black and white dog came out of the barn and ambled up to him, like it was his regular job to greet guests and be petted. Didn't even bother to bark. "Hello?" Jack called, having no idea what he would say if someone appeared. But no one responded. Jack noticed the house was a lot like this dog. Nice, but worn down. Kind of tilted in some places and bulging in others. After a few pats, the dog strolled back into the barn. Jack followed him. At one time, there might have been livestock in this barn. Cows or sheep, maybe, but not any longer. Now it was being used for storage of old, rusty equipment and gardening tools. Cool! There was a loft! Ever since his third-grade teacher had read the part in Charlotte's Web, where Avery and Fern swing from a rope in Mr. Zuckerman's barn, Jack had wanted to look down from a loft. He climbed the wooden ladder cautiously, trying not to put weight on his sore finger. There were some cushions and some scratchy wool blankets up there, and a wooden box turned over to make a table of sorts. Jack guessed the kids used to play here, maybe even had sleepovers. But it was clear from the look of things that it had been a long time ago. Mouse droppings were everywhere. Even though Jack was from the city, mouse poop didn't gross him out. Heck, in the city he'd seen rats, and their apartment had plenty of roaches. Mice were nothing at all. Jack shook one of the blankets out and covered the cushions. Then he sat down and tried to imagine that he lived on this farm, that this loft belonged to him. He pulled the elephant out of his pocket and placed it on the box where he could see it. It was his now. He yanked his sleeping bag out of his backpack, and his comic books, too. He'd rest here for a little bit, and then he'd figure out what to do. It was night when he woke with a start. He'd fallen asleep, and it was pitch black in the barn. Without his cell phone, he didn't know if it was 10 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning. He lay there, wondering what he was going to do. What if the bartender had been wrong? What if his mother was looking for him? Maybe I should go back to the campsite tomorrow, thought Jack. But school started tomorrow. How long will it be, he wondered, before the guidance counselor starts looking for me? Would he just be wasting valuable time by hoping his mother showed up? On her way to tropical beaches, the bartender had said. Round and round went his thoughts, each one feeling momentarily promising, and then hopeless. Night sounds, crickets, a truck horn in the distance, grew louder around him. Everything had an opinion. Jack knew the dog was still down below. He could hear its tags jangling as it scratched itself. Too bad dogs can't climb ladders, he thought. He would have liked that old dog stretched out beside him. For a moment he contemplated getting down from the loft and sleeping with the dog. But the cushions were comfortable, and he still felt so very tired. That's what worry did to Jack, made him incredibly tired. tired the way his mom always was after the spinning times. She'd come home and crawl into bed, close the shades and pull up the covers, and that's where Jack would find her for days, sometimes even weeks after a spinning time. Tired like that. He closed his eyes and fell back to sleep. When he woke again, sunlight was sliding through all the cracks in the walls, giving the barn a sort of comfortable, cozy feeling. Until, that is, he remembered that today was the day his vacation was officially over. Then nothing felt comfortable. The cushions were lumpy, his mouth was dry, it felt like mice had made a nest in it while he slept. And he was hungry. Boy, was he hungry. He hadn't eaten anything but a bag of trail mix and 2 tastes of ice cream yesterday. I'm on a farm, he thought as he left his stuff, all but his empty water bottle, that is, and climbed down the ladder. There has to be a garden, right? After all, the barn was full of gardening tools. And if there was a garden, surely there would be a hose for watering the garden. He didn't know which would taste better right now, a big crunchy carrot or a mouthful of cool running water. He'd find something to eat, and then he'd figure out a plan. Not knowing if the farm family had returned, he pushed the barn door open a crack. He and the dog slipped through. Then he moved around to the side of the barn where he couldn't be seen from the house. There it was, the garden. He could see a scarecrow in a back field not far from where he stood. Only problem was, he'd have no place to hide while picking. Anyone looking out the back window would see him. He went around front to see if a car had come in during the night. Mist was rising, hovering just above the fields with hay bales across the road, and not a car in sight. Not on the dirt road that had led him here, not in the driveway either. Maybe the owners had gone away for the long weekend. Even country people needed a vacation, right? Jack guessed it would be safe to help himself to a vegetable or 2. Heck, he thought as he walked around back through the dew-soaked grass to the garden, the vegetables are just going to go to waste if these people aren't here to pick them. A net, held up by tall poles, surrounded the garden to keep away deer. But Jack spotted a place where the netting could be untied and the garden entered. He was barely through when he spotted a ripe tomato calling his name. The skin was warm from the morning sun, and he held it to his nose for just a moment before biting into it like it was a big old apple or a juicy plum. Seeds squirted out, dripping down his chin. He reached for another. So, you think you can just help yourself to my tomatoes? Jack jumped, using his forearm to wipe the evidence off his chin. He hadn't heard the woman approach, but there she was, not more than a few feet from him, standing crossly in her black rubber boots and straw hat. Glancing around, he noticed sheets on a line on the side of the house opposite the barn. There was a basket on the ground beneath them. She must have been hanging the wash. Of course she'd seen him. Sorry, he stammered. The tomato, it's just, where are you from? She swatted a fly away from her face. I was running down your road, training. Where did that come from? Jack had never trained for anything in his life, though he had thought about going out for football now that he was going to be in 6th grade this fall. She was staring at his splinted finger, which was looking pretty dirty already. Why aren't you in school today? She asked. Or is this one of those years when you don't start the day after Labor Day? He just nodded, having no idea whether the kids in Maine were back today or not. You ate from the pantry row, she said. Pantry row? Don't you garden? Jack shook his head. Well, then you wouldn't know. We're encouraged to plant 1 row of vegetables for the food pantry. That way those in need can have fresh vegetables, not just hamburger helper. Sorry, he said again as the woman sized him up. Tell you what, she said. I can't drive any longer. Stubborn son took my car, so I have no way to get these vegetables into town. If you'll pick this row and take 'em up to the pantry, I'll let you bring some home for your family. That way I'll get my vegetables harvested before the frost, and you'll get more training. Heavy lifting, she said, trying not to smile. No way, Jack thought. He didn't need to be gardening and running errands for some old lady he didn't even know. He had a mother to find. He glanced off into the woods, considered bolting. But his stuff, it was still up in the loft. And what would she do if he ran? Would she know he was lying about living nearby, about school? Would she be suspicious enough to call the police? He looked down at the garden. There were green beans dangling right next to the ripe tomatoes. The woman did say she'd give him food. And while he was back in town, he could go back to the library, get online. It was Tuesday. The library would surely be open today. It's a deal, he said. She gave him instructions on how to pick the last of the summer vegetables. Green beans, red peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, zucchini, basil, carrots, and potatoes. And then she went back to hanging clothes. Jack was tempted to eat as he picked, especially the carrots, which didn't look like the ones his mother bought from the store, but were palm size and curled a little, like wiggly goldfish pulled from the ground. He used his fingers to wipe away the dirt on one and glanced at the old woman, who had now moved on to watering her flowers. She was looking right up at him, as if his guiltiness had called her. Jack went back to picking. The next time he looked up, the woman was walking toward him. She placed most of the vegetables into a large netted bag. Bring these to the pantry, she said, tying the top. Tell them they're for Mrs. Olson, and tell them I need a box of dried milk. They can spare one. Jack nodded. When you get back, you can take this home with you, she said, tossing the rest of the vegetables into a paper bag, which she set by the front porch. Ask your mom to make you a harvest stew. Maybe it'll inspire you to plant some tomatoes next year. With permission, he filled up his water bottle at the hose and took off. It wasn't until he had walked for about 10 minutes that he realized a tomato wasn't exactly the most filling of breakfasts, and that, well, he could just hide this food in the woods and tell the woman he'd delivered it. Or not tell her anything at all. Just sneak back and get his stuff from the loft and the bag of vegetables from the front porch. But what about the dried milk? Asked a voice inside his head. He remembered the woman's half-smile. I was just what-ifing, he answered. He wasn't going to take these vegetables. He didn't have to steal this time. She was giving him food. No, he was working for food. But boy, was he hungry. Really hungry. Suddenly something new occurred to him. This food he was carrying, it was for people who couldn't afford to buy food. He couldn't buy food. It was for people like him. He thought about the homeless people that he recognized in Jamaica Plain, the woman who sat outside the laundromat and sometimes asked passers-by to brush her hair, and the man who was dressed in a suit, a ratty suit, but still he always wore a tie, and offered to write a poem for $1. Once Jack had paid him, and the man had written this: We all wear bifocals, some invisible. When looking down, remember to look up. The view might be clearer, and vice versa. How had those people ended up so needy? Were they living comfortably one day and on the street the next? And now he was one of them. No food and no money to buy it. That being the case, the people at the food pantry probably wouldn't mind if he ate just one carrot. Just one. So he did. One fresh, wiggly carrot. And walking along, chomping on that carrot, trying to make it last as long as he could, he realized 2 more things. 1, he had no idea where the food pantry was located. And 2, he was heading right back into Bar Harbor, the place where just yesterday he had run from.